Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Wednesday, May 17th at 10:05 a.m. and we are here for an allowable ex parte communication briefing in ND-2023-20-EG. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. I note that Commissioner Thomas is on leave this week. I now recognize our staff counsel, Ms. Clausen, to read the docket.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and to all who are present today. Today is May 17th, 2023. It's 10 a.m., and we are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for allowable ex parte communication briefing in docket number ND-2023-20-EG from Conservation Voters of South Carolina regarding the energy burden on ratepayers in South Carolina and energy efficiency programs in other states. This matter has been noticed on the Commission's website as required by South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-3-260C6.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Let's take appearances. I see Mr. Tynan and Mr. Walsh. Welcome. Would you like to introduce who you've got with you?
Yes, Madam Chair. So with me and Mr. Tynan, we have Jalen Brooks Nepfley, also of Conservation Voters of South Carolina, and Mr. Edward Yim, who is joining us as a presenter.
Thank you. And who's here for the Office of Regulatory Staff?
Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. My name is Chad Torrey, Staff Counsel for ORS, and I'm here as the designee of the Executive Director. I'm joined by ORS Staff Counsel Joshua Austin as well. Welcome.
Thank you. We've got some ground rules we need to go over before we begin, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Tynan, so bear with us just a moment, and I recognize Ms. Clausen to go over the parameters of which we can conduct an allowable ex parte communication briefing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The subject matter notice to be discussed today relates to Conservation Voters of South Carolina briefing on the energy burden on ratepayers in South Carolina and energy efficiency programs. I would remind everyone that this is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C, and the requirements of that statute are, in part, that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. Therefore, I would ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff to please refrain from discussing any matters not related to this specific topic. The statute prohibits any presenter, commissioner, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to an ultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. I would also ask the presenters, staff, and commissioners to refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or document of any kind that is not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion into the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. If anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable ex parte briefings, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection will be made. Finally, everyone in attendance today must sign in. Everyone in the hearing room must read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door. It is required by law for each attendee to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with in this presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Clausen. Mr. Torrey, I recognize you to see if there are any additional instructions or cautions which you may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to echo one point that Ms. Clausen made, and that is with respect to the prohibitions of the statute, and that is would request that the presenters and commissioners try to refrain from referencing or asking about any document that has not been submitted as part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. With that, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Tynan, I'll turn it over to you. And again, welcome you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to the information y'all are going to present to us.
Madam Chair, thank you. Vice Chair, Commissioners, good morning. Court Walsh from the law firm of Nelson Mullins. I think that the only mistake I can make here today is to delay you from getting to hear the folks that really have the knowledge that you want to have or get from today. So all I want to say is thank you again for letting us come present to you. It's always a pleasure. And of course, I'm here if I can be of any assistance. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Tynan from Conservation Voters of South Carolina.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you all for having us again. I'm John Tynan, Executive Director of Conservation Voters of South Carolina. I believe this is our third allowable ex parte briefing with you all, so it's become a bit of a trend. So we're pleased to be back. We're pleased to share information with you today. As you know, CVSC, we are a bipartisan statewide organization working on all things conservation and environment, but particularly clean energy. And in the briefings that we've had to you with you all, we've covered a wide range of topics. And we do that when we are also talking to our partners, to lawmakers, to constituents throughout the state, and a number of the same things continue to come up. We've talked about EVs with you all, electric vehicles. We talked about natural gas with you all. And in the last conversation, the last allowable ex parte, around natural gas volatility, there were a lot of questions that y'all raised regarding energy usage and energy efficiency. And so that's really what led us to this conversation today, is doing a bit deeper of a dive on energy efficiency, energy burden, and what is being done elsewhere to address those issues. I will note that there are a lot more folks in the audience today. There are a number of partners who we work with, a number of staff members for CVSC. They're intrigued to learn more about these processes, to learn more about what y'all do, but also it demonstrates how important and interesting this topic is, energy efficiency, energy burden, and what can be done about it. So with that being said, I will pass it to Jalen Brooks-Neffley, who is an energy project manager with CVSC. She's been sitting in the audience many of the times that we've done these other briefings, but she's really been the mastermind, the coordinator of all of these. So we wanted to bring her up to the table for her to do the introduction, share a little bit more information. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. My name is Jalen Brooks-Neffley, and I'm an energy project manager for Conservation Voters of South Carolina. I know the PSC has a lot on its plate, so I just want to thank you for spending some time with us this morning, and we're excited to have this discussion. So we're here to discuss two related topics, which are energy burden in our state, and one tool that can be used to address energy burden, which is energy efficiency. So we know that, excuse me, energy burden or energy affordability has been a common topic at this commission, and we also discussed it a little bit at our last briefing, so we just wanted to follow up and provide some more information. So I'll start on a personal note. So I live in an apartment, and I have a neighbor. She's widowed, she's disabled, she lives on a fixed income, and over the summer she really struggles to keep her unit at a reasonable temperature.
Excuse me. Could you pull the microphone a little closer? I am
thought
old
I
and
might
can't
have to
hear.
do that.
Thank you.
Is that better?
That's better.
Thank you. All right. So my neighbor, she's had difficulty keeping her unit at a reasonable temperature to help with her chronic pain. She really agonized for a long time over how to pay these bills, and she ended up moving away. She moved to North Carolina, even though she's been here for years and has a lot of friends and family here. And you can hear stories like this across the state. So our conservation work, as John said, has us crossing paths with different kinds of organizations. including organizations that work with low-income people to improve their homes. And you hear all kinds of upsetting stories about people with leaky roofs and holes in their floors, just people in some unsafe and unhealthy situations. And so that's the backdrop for what we're going to talk about today. So I'll get a little bit more into the facts and figures now. As reported by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, South Carolina has some of the highest energy bills in the country. We spend an average of about $418 a month on utilities, with about $138 of that going to electricity. That is going to be a lot for any household, but it's going to hit some people harder than others. And that is what we refer to as energy burden, or the portion of your income that's spent on energy, which is usually expressed as a percentage. And if you look at the U.S. Department of Energy sources, the low-income households in the U.S. face an energy burden 3 times higher than other households. Zooming in a little closer, in southeastern states like ours, our low-income citizens are generally spending 10 to 12% of their income on energy, as sort of an average. And we consider the limit of affordable energy to be about 6% of your income, so that is well above that limit. But we can get more specific and sort of zoom in on the poorest households in South Carolina, which have even higher energy burdens than that. So this information is compiled from the Department of Energy LEAD tool, which stands for the Low Income Energy Affordability Data. And this tool shows that many low-income households are spending 30% or more of their income on energy. And in fact, some of those in the bottom 30% of median income areas have average burdens exceeding 70%. So the upshot of this is that the less money you make, the harder these energy bills are going to hit you. Now, the reasons for this are complicated. Our long and hot summers definitely play a role, and as you know, we saw this winter, we also get some cold winters. And as I've learned from our partner organizations, we also have a lot of homes in poor repair. We have a lot of mobile homes and manufactured housing, and these can be very inefficient. So that's going to bring us to our main speaker today. So we have this difficult situation in South Carolina, but we also have a variety of tools to address the issue. And there's many tools that we could discuss, but today we're going to talk about energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is a great option because the cheapest energy is the energy you don't have to produce. But in researching this presentation, I also found that it's a great solution because it doesn't only reduce bills, but it also has the potential to improve people's quality of life. So with a lot of the solutions we're going to talk about in a minute, also make people's homes safer, healthier, and more comfortable, which I think is something we all want to see for our state. So I'll now introduce our main speaker, Mr. Edward Yim. Edward is State and Utility Policy Director at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE. ACEEE is a nonprofit research organization that researches policies to reduce energy waste. Edward is a lawyer and former architect and has experience at the District of Columbia Department of Energy and Environment and at the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. In his role at ACEEE, he strategizes on how utilities can incorporate energy efficiency programs that are effective and innovative. And today he's going to share some good approaches to maximizing energy and bill savings that have been used in other states. So with that, I will turn it over to Edward.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Thank you so much for making the time for this briefing. And thank you, Jalen, for the introduction. I'll skip the slide that you already went over. So this morning, I would like to just talk with you a little bit about how energy efficiency and weatherization can make a significant impact on lowering the energy burden for residents, and particularly for low-income residents. And when these energy efficiency and weatherization measures for residential homes are aggregated and deployed at scale, they can also then provide a great benefit to the grid by lowering the system demand, allowing the grid operator to better deal with peak loads and extreme weather events. A good way of really maximizing the benefits of these energy efficiency and weatherization measures is by really taking a whole home approach that really individually identifies which types of measures will be most beneficial and impactful through a home assessment, and then that is then connected to a set of or menu of options that the resident can access. So I'll talk about a couple of examples that utilities in other states are implementing today. And I'll just end with just a quick mention of a bill assistance mechanism called Percentage of Income Payment Program, or PIP, and just talk about how they can also be merged with energy efficiency efforts to provide relief and value to residents. And I look forward to our conversation today. This is our foundational statement that, in our view, from our perspective, energy efficiency really never fails to provide value at all perspectives. From the customer's perspective, it's good because it lowers the energy bill and increases home comfort. It's good for the utility and the system, grid system, because it, again, lowers the system demand, better allowing the grid operator to handle peak loads and extreme weather events. And that in turn will translate into downward pressure on rates for all ratepayers, and which then will also then ease the burden on bill assistance and arrear management efforts. So, as Jalen mentioned, we've done some research of our own in terms of what the picture of energy burden looks like across the country, and we broke that out by region. The number you see in parentheses is the percentage of monthly income that a typical median household pays for their utility bill, which is about 3% generally. The number you see in the red above that is the percentage of monthly income that a median low-income household pays for their utility bill. And in the Southeast region, we are showing that as about 8.4%, but I'll defer to actually the figure that Jalen mentioned that's more particular for the state. So while both of these numbers could be talking about the same amount, roughly maybe $100 per month or $120 per month, but the difference is really stark when you look at what the overall amount of the monthly budget that a particular household has. If a particular family has available, let's say $3,000 or so in monthly income to pay for all of their expenses, $100 or $120 bill could be budgeted. But if what they have is roughly about $1,200 per month to pay for all expenses, including rent, that $100 bill is a significant hit that forces families today to make some painful trade-offs. And another finding that we made in doing this survey is that we know that on average, about 30% of all households in the US could be described as being low income. But when we look at the reports by households that are adopting energy efficiency measures, only about 17% of them could be described as being low income. So we know that low income households are on average being underserved, or they're not participating as much. So what can efficiency and weatherization do for that situation? So we have a robust finding from the US Department of Energy that they made back in 2013. And the key takeaway is that a set of cost-effective efficiency and weatherization measures for homes can really reduce the baseline energy usage by an average of 25% or so. And this finding was made based on their assessment and evaluation of roughly about 100,000 residential units that made some energy efficiency improvements across 25 states. So it's a pretty good sample size. It's a very robust sample size and pretty robust findings. And these findings were independently evaluated and verified. I just pulled the table that you see is I pulled together a list of measures that were used for the for those 100,000 residential unit upgrades. And just a quick comments I'll just note is that you'll see the CFL, the mention of the CFL bulbs. Obviously, that just speaks to the date when this report was made, which is 2013. And of course, most utility programs now all use LED. And just another slight deviation from a typical utility program would be that they mention window replacement, which tends to be a deeper measure than most utility programs tend to include and incorporate. So what that 25% or 26% savings means in terms of the energy burden is that if that percentage, if those savings were realized for low-income households, at least on an average term, that could then lower the current energy burden average for low-income households from 8.4% to 6%, which is, again, as JLM mentioned earlier, is thought to be the ceiling of energy affordability. Since the study that I mentioned is about 10 years old, I wanted to just bring another study, a more recent study that can sort of corroborate and support that finding. And this report comes from ICF, which is a international utility consultant. And they did a U.S. Potential study for savings from insulation measures alone in the residential sector. And what they found was that for the Southeast region, just again, maximizing cost-effective insulation measures can cut the baseline usage by 25% or so. And of course, over the lifetime, it will deliver multiples of benefits over cost. So again, that largely corroborates the 2013 US DOE finding that they made. And when these residential measures are really aggregated and maximally deployed at scale, they can, as I mentioned earlier briefly, they can make a significant impact on lowering the system demand. And that will allow the grid operator to deal with the new peak loads that will come with extreme weather events. So this slide, the point that I would like to make is that in 2021, after Texas experienced Winter Storm Uri, which caused major widespread outage that I'm sure many of us may remember, and it made many news cycles. After that incident, the Texas grid operators were trying to figure out how to meet the new winter peak load that the Winter Storm Uri brought. And what they figured out was that they needed to figure out how to bring online about 11.5 gigawatt of new generation and capacity. So they proposed to do that through new power plants and transmission lines and so forth. And we decided to take a look at that to see whether there may be an alternative solution that could do the job, but at a lesser cost. And what we found was that the set of measures that are described below those photos that I'm showing you, and by the way, the photos just depict the effect of the outage during the Winter Storm Uri in Houston. Those set of measures are essentially pretty typical. They're nothing really fancy. They're pretty typical generic set of measures that consist of efficient appliances and insulation measures and weatherization measures coupled with some demand response capabilities using smart thermostats, that if you were to maximally deploy that set of measures in the residential sector, those measures could deliver the 11.5 gigawatt of new capacity that Texas would need, but at a much lower cost. So instead of $8 billion, this would be roughly about $5 billion. And those cost savings would then lower the pressure on rates and then thereby saving money for all ratepayers. And it would provide great value in addition to other attendant benefits that energy efficiency brings, like home comfort that JLM mentioned. So the key here is so we know generally that energy efficiency, I mean, there's plenty of evidence, historical evidence, and lots of records about energy efficiency and weatherization really bringing multiples of benefits over cost. But the key is really how to identify which particular measures are going to be most impactful and valuable for a particular home. So this is where we need a data-driven approach. And we can also get some ideas by just looking at some high-level studies. So the chart that you see on the left is based on the DOE survey of the typical residential homes in the Southeast region. And based on that survey, we see that roughly about half of the total energy that's being consumed in a residential home is being used for space conditioning, space heating, and space cooling. And by the way, I mean, this particular breakdown of end uses really don't vary that much from region to region. Space conditioning is really the major component of all home uses. So we know that space conditioning is one area that we absolutely must prioritize in order to really reduce our energy usage and reduce our energy bill. You can get some other ideas by looking at some high-level studies. The chart that you see on the right is from McKinsey, the famous consulting firm, that they did in 2008. They did a very comprehensive look, a nationwide comprehensive look at all available energy efficiency and weatherization measures and figure out, on average, which measures were going to deliver the most amount of savings. And the top performers, like top 5, are the ones that we generally think of, which is insulation, efficient HVAC appliances. But number 1 actually took many of us by surprise, which is ceiling ducts. This is pretty simple and boring measure that many of us don't really pay attention to. It's certainly not nothing that would light up a cocktail hour conversation. But nonetheless, it is really one of the most impactful things. So again, from these high-level studies, we can really figure out generally which areas in a home that we really ought to be paying attention to. And just another quick comment on the duct ceiling. This is really just from the HVAC system perspective, what happens to that energy. So of all the energy that's flowing through the HVAC system, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is roughly about half of the total energy that's used in a home, 15% of that is lost just through poor sealing of the duct. So that ends up being a pretty huge amount. And the UPS picture that I put in there is really just a side quip that we really ought to think of energy delivery business is in fact a delivery business. And just as UPS and FedEx, they don't just lose shipments randomly, 1 out of every 10 units that the energy industry does over transmission and distribution line losses and some of these HVAC system losses. And I think we're just a little bit maybe too accepting of these energy losses that happen in the energy service sector that we would not accept in any other business. So even though we can sort of get some high-level pictures of which area in a home should be prioritized, it really helps to have a home assessment that will really allow the resident and the efficiency provider to identify where the biggest challenges are so that they can together sort of triage and prioritize which challenges they are going to address first based on an available set of measures that are cost-effective. So the picture that you see, and by the way, the home assessment isn't complex, it's not burdensome, it's not expensive, especially these days. It can be done simple, streamlined, it can be done pretty quickly. Especially these days, we have thermal imaging cameras that you can pick up at Home Depot for a couple $100s. For the professional grades, it's $500 or so. The pictures that you see on the top row, it just shows you what looks to be a normal soffit wall. But when you take a closer look, just a snapshot of the camera, you see that there's an entire section of the wall is missing insulation. When you look at the picture on the bottom row, what looks to be a normal ceiling, what they're actually showing is that you have water-damaged insulation. So that's not only failing as an energy measure, but that's actually a health problem because of mold concerns. So this is what a home assessment, sort of a quick streamlined home assessment, allows you to really identify, triage, and really prioritize which measures that they can address, so that they can gain the maximum amount of value for the available set of measures that an efficiency provider has at their disposal. So a couple of examples that from utilities in other states that do this. There's one example comes from Arkansas, Entergy Arkansas. They have a whole home approach that leads with a no-cost home energy assessment that provides no-cost measures for efficient appliances, that also then provides discounted measures for insulation and weatherization. There's a market rate customer version of this, and then there's a low-income customer version of this. And of course, they also have similar programs for commercial sector and industrial sector and agricultural sector. And when all those program savings are combined, they produce a pretty robust savings of about, last year they reported saving about 1.3% of the total retail sales, with a very robust benefit cost ratio of 2.9. So that's multiples of benefits over cost. Just my quick note here that my apologies for the typo. The 2.64 TRC ratio is referring to their commercial sector ratio that I forgot to delete. So my apologies for that typo, commissioners. And this type of approach, essentially a whole home approach that's really individualized and tailored for a particular home based on a preset menu of options, is an approach that all investor-owned utilities in Arkansas use. It's not just unique to Entergy. Another example comes from Michigan. This is Consumers Energy. And I picked their multifamily program. And again, it's similar idea. This is a multifamily program that they build to be a one-stop shop approach. So it leads with a property assessment, no-cost property assessment. And then it provides some no-cost efficient appliance measures, and then discounted insulation and weatherization measures. What's unique about this program that I really like is that they provide energy advisors. So you can really think about them as sort of a concierge, that they work directly with there's energy advisor that is assigned with the facilities manager. So they work directly with them and educate them, give them guidance, answer questions, help them triage and prioritize which set of measures that are available to them will bring them the most benefit. And another function that these energy advisors perform from Consumers Energy is that they also help identify which low-income multifamily buildings are eligible to participate but are not. So they also sort of function as a recruiter to increase the participation rate of low-income multifamily homes. Again, similar to Arkansas, they deliver very robust savings, higher than the ones in Arkansas, about 2.3% of the total retail sales. Again, very robust benefit cost ratio. So again, multiples of benefits over cost. So those are a couple of the specific examples that I bring before you. But it's not really just two of these. These aren't the only ones. There are many other utilities in many other states that use this whole home approach that leads with a home energy assessment and then provide them with a menu of options that the customers can choose. You'll find them in all throughout the different states, throughout different utility types, investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and rural co-ops. So this is my last slide, and just like to briefly touch on this idea of the bill assistance mechanism called PIP, or Percentage of Income Payment Program. It's been around for some years, and currently there are about 10 to 11 states that have an established program. The general idea is that for folks enrolled in this program, their utility, they shouldn't have to pay more than the maximum of their energy affordability, or what's considered to be their energy burden, which, as Jayla mentioned, is considered to be roughly about 6% of the monthly income. So there are a few examples that I picked out for you. Virginia, I picked out Virginia because it's one of the most recent ones to really begin to implement this. They just enacted the law back in 2021. The implementation guidelines and regulations are, I believe they're underway. One thing I like about this program is that they, as for the program administrator, when they're accepting these applicants, they sort of check, they will have to check whether these applicants are also receiving low-income energy efficiency and weatherization services. And if they find out that they do not, then they make the connection. So they sort of function a little bit like an energy advisor, that's sort of a concierge. Nevada has one, and one thing I like about them is that they have a more ambitious goal for lowering the energy burden, where a lot of the states that have PIPs on their books, they usually set the threshold at 6% of monthly income. But in Nevada, they want their low-income ratepayers to not have to pay more than what a typical household pays. And in Nevada so they'll calculate what that amount is each year. So last year, it was calculated to be roughly about 2.3% of the monthly income. So that's what their PIP program will be set at. Colorado is probably the most typical example that sets the threshold at 6%. So that concludes my comments. Generally, the PIP and energy efficiency and weatherization, when they're combined together, they can really do a lot of good for low-income ratepayers.
May I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
This last slide with Virginia and Colorado, is that done by their commissions or is that done by legislation?
I cannot, my apologies, Vice Chair. I can't speak to the Colorado example, whether that was established by the commission rule or by legislation. Virginia, it was an active legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yum. Commissioners, questions for the panel? Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today. I'm going to go through your presentation and just ask questions as I go through, and that keeps me focused on what you presented. I'm going to start with the EE plus weatherization can cut, the one that was based on the 2013 study. One of the things that I thought about as you were presenting was the impact of smart features, and I wondered if you could just add anything to that, given the time frame of this study.
Yes, certainly the types of demand response features that were likely to be considered in this study are going to be an older generation features, to be sure. So sort of the demand response functions of air condition, the utility directed air condition shutoffs. Those programs have been around for a very long time. I do think that some of the smart thermostat functions began around that time, but it's now probably on sort of the third generation of those versions. So they are able to react much more quickly in real time, thereby giving more assurance to the grid operators who are relying on this demand response savings to actually show up when they're really needed. So I think that's one distinction that I think I can make from the 2013 efforts to some of the more recent efforts that you might see.
Do you have any knowledge of where that, at what level that information becomes more impactful? For example, if you can see it daily versus seeing it hourly versus seeing it in 15-minute increments?
I can speak to that a little bit. so that really the demand response, the granularity of the demand response program in terms of the time interval really depends on the purpose of that demand response program. Generally, really just to avoid some of the highest seasonal load, peak load, is you don't really need to get that particularly granular at like 15-minute interval or anything like that, because those are really the grid operators are trying to figure out how to avoid the highest daily usage. So in terms of if the grid operator's objective is to reduce the peak, the highest, let's say highest 10 hours, the top highest 10 peak hours, then those can be really, you can just identify which days those hours tend to occur, and they can just provide the appropriate incentives and design the demand response programs for that. Some of the more granular time interval demand response programs on a sort of sub-hourly level programs are really designed to maximize the optimization of the distribution grid, how to reduce the load and burden in a particular circuit or a particular feeder or a particular substation. And because those certainly will occur on a minute-by-minute level, if you're trying to reduce not the overall system, but that more localized areas, reduce the burden on the localized area systems, then some of the sub-hourly system demand responses will be more useful. So it would really largely depend on the objective that the grid operators are trying to achieve.
Thank you. I know I have more than this, but I'll go to your PIP slide and that example. What's the experience with dealing with determining a maximum bill based on an income level and use? Where is there an energy efficiency piece that's layered on with the PIP, or is the PIP total? Is it paired with energy efficiency, or is it just about energy burden, or are there examples where they do both? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. Historically, so I mean, PIP. By the way, I should just sort of qualify my response. PIP is a mechanism that our team, and including myself, we're just studying and surveying these issues. Again, they've been around for a couple of decades, but it's only recently that it really seems to be getting a renewed interest and focus in some states. And for that reason, we are really studying this issue. So I'm by no means PIP's expert, and I actually have found that there's sort of a scarcity of evaluation and reports on the performance and the results of these PIP programs. So having said that, PIP did begin as a really energy burden solution and not a sort of a holistic energy solution overall for low-income ratepayers. But as I mentioned, so the approach that Virginia is taking is that they are trying to marry the two. And we all know that historically, bill assistance programs and efforts have been completely siloed from energy conservation and efficiency efforts. And we really do need to sort of merge them together. But apart from, like in Nevada and Colorado, and I have a colleague who's currently researching this issue now, but I've not been made aware of many examples that so far merge them together, and I think the Virginia approach is considered to be somewhat of an advance on that topic.
Finally, at least for the minute, unless I find some more questions,
Sure.
This focus has been on residential ratepayers.
Yes.
But the overall discussion was ratepayers. Is there anything that you can add with regard to kind of office, the relationship between what you've said about residential and what might be impactful for office, commercial, industrial. If there's not a connection, just tell me that.
Yeah, I did really focus this presentation on the residential ratepayers because of the overall topic was about the energy burden. And of course, that's energy burden isn't a phrase that's applied to the commercial sector. There is, however, a complete connection in terms of how the commercial sector maximizes the benefits of energy efficiency and weatherization. They absolutely do an individualized approach themselves. Whether that's offered to them or not, they will sort of insist on that because they're not just going to adopt any measures willy-nilly just because they're available. They will insist that there is some sort of an audit and an assessment to figure out to identify which measures are going to bring most value and benefit. So in terms of this sort of a holistic, comprehensive approach, with an eye toward best triaging and prioritizing their challenges for maximum benefit, there is completely a connection of what how the commercial ratepayer programs operate in relation to the residential ratepayers. That type of relationship is obviously even pronounced even more so for the industrial sector folks. They care very much about optimal energy efficiency programs, given that sometimes, for example, some aluminum smelters like Alcoa, energy bill ends up being half of their operating budget. So really just having an optimal energy efficiency and conservation program is key, and they will absolutely spend a lot, they will put a lot of attention on this careful assessment and audit of where they can get savings in a cost-effective way.
Thank you. I found a couple more of my questions.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And I'd like to just finish and then yield to my colleagues. Is there anything that you can add to what you've shared in terms of the role of how these programs are paid for in terms of the resident, the ease of on-bill financing, or other mechanisms that allow the beneficiary to participate in the cost, understanding that sometimes the beneficiaries are much more than the individual house?
Yes. I think you'll find a wide mix. So many times the costs are really recovered through surcharge on the class ratepayers. In some instances, I think there are examples of unbilled financing. So I think you'll find different choices being made in different jurisdictions.
And can you add anything in terms of partnering with organizations like community development groups that handle, as you look at energy efficiency, it doesn't make sense to install certain energy efficiency elements if the roof needs replacing, or if, as one of you mentioned, the impact of just an unsealed house. Mm-hmm. Are there win-wins out there in terms of partnering with community development groups to take what basic energy or energy efficiency might do and make it more applicable to some of the most needy circumstances?
Yeah. So I mean, I can just certainly elaborate on that point, just as similar to the point about the need to merge bill assistance efforts with energy efficiency and conservation effort together. There really is a need to merge efficiency and conservation efforts with health and safety efforts that are already being made. And those partnerships that Commissioner Williams, you're referring to, many of them are really done by community groups, community organizations. So it's really, that partnership is critical if we wanted to really merge those health and safety efforts and efficiency and conservation efforts together. That is key. Good.
I'll make this my last question.
I love questions.
I'm thinking about aging housing and also housing codes, and I don't know if there's anything else that can be added in terms of there was reference to manufactured housing and to mobile homes, both of which have stronger codes today than they had when many of them were put in place. How do we help folks that are in older facilities that were just not built at all with energy conservation in mind?
That is, so I'll respond to that by just noting that I forgot to introduce my colleague, Kristen Campbell, who's seated in the audience. And she and I will be working on sort of good policies and program options for state policymakers on existing manufacturing homes based on some new work and new research that's coming out. But having said that, I mean, I am mindful of the scope of this presentation, and this does seem to be maybe an addition of that.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for your patience and all the questions.
Oh, no. Yeah. Thank you for the questions.
Commissioner Justin Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Panel, appreciate you being here today. I want to start by making a couple of acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge Mr. Tynan for coming before us the third time because I don't know if you all appreciate how important the Allowable ex parte briefings are for the commission from an educational standpoint. Now, we have the opportunity to go to NARUC and various trainings to learn more about the industry and learn more about emerging trends and so forth and so on. And then, obviously, we can pursue our own educational endeavors. But without you all coming and making presentations like the natural gas presentation and the EV presentation, we don't really have the opportunity to engage the way we're engaging now and ask questions and really determine how we can apply the information to our state. When we go to some of our workshops and trainings, we get presentations, but usually that information is academic in nature, theoretical in nature, and we try to do the best we can to apply it at the appropriate time. But it's not as intimate and not as, I find, not as engaging as the Allowable ex parte briefings. So I appreciate that, and I want to acknowledge that. Also want to acknowledge people like Miss Jalen Brooks. How do you say the last part of your name?
It's Neffley.
Neffley. Miss Jalen Brooks Neffley and Mr. Edward Yim, because I've recently been introduced to a world of academia where there are people that really commit themselves to energy and the environment and trying to tackle some of these large problems that we have. I mean, in a very meaningful way. White papers and studies. I mean, the literature available on these topics is to the point where there's really no unanswered questions, really. A lot of these problems that exist in our state, if you want to call them problems, you could argue they've already been answered. We're just trying to get there. We're trying to do the best we can to get there. So with that background in mind, I want to focus more on results and outcomes because I understand everything you said in your presentation. But my question is very simple. Let's say everything that you discussed before us today happened to be implemented in South Carolina. Would that result in a lower bill, dollar amount bill?
Yes, it should. So that really is the central finding that I'm going to stick with, and I'm going to stick fast to my gun. That if you really marshal together a set of sensible, efficient appliance and weatherization measures, just sensible set, not the entire set, but just a sensible selection of the measures, that could cut today. That really should reduce the energy bill of these low-income households by a significant amount. The U.S. DOE report is reporting out, and I wrote it out as an average figure, about roughly 26%. But some homes see savings as higher, almost near 40, so high 30% savings. Some see as in the low teens, maybe like 13%. So that's really the range. So so if you're really shaving anywhere between 13 to 39% of your energy usage, that will certainly reduce your energy bill on the commodity side, on the supply side portion.
So if you slow down for me there.
Yeah.
So when you say that, you qualify that answer by on the commodity side, on the supply side, and I get that part. So let me be more specific and ask a better question. On a residential ratepayers bill, will they see the savings if everything that you discussed today, if it happened to be implemented in one of the service territories that exist in South Carolina? Do you believe that the average residential ratepayer will see a financial benefit that results in a lower monthly bill?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Good. That's good. I'm glad that's your answer. I want to transition a little bit. Mr. Tynan, I think it was the natural gas presentation. During that presentation, he had another expert with him, and we talked about housing stock. I don't know if you remember that, Mr. Tynan. And I'll tell you, I'm in my 5th year as a commissioner, and the first 4 years, I really spent trying to figure out what was going on, to be honest with you. Like the real nitty-gritty details of all the cases that come before us. So now, after I've been initiated there, I'm really focused on, again, results, outcomes, and solutions. And one of the most troubling issues I see in our state is that we know this is a known problem. It's not theory. It's not probability. We know that there are people that live in houses that are the very opposite of energy efficient. We know that. That is a known problem. And when we hear a rate case, we hear these averages. The average user, 1,000 kilowatts per month, or how many ever therms. We hear these things, but it really is sort of meaningless, in my opinion, to the person that lives in that energy inefficient home. It's meaningless. It's completely meaningless. It doesn't even mean a thing. What responsibility, if any, do you think utilities have in tackling energy efficiency with homes that are known to be inefficient? Because let me help you here, give you some more time to think, because I see you thinking. And phone a friend, if you need to do that. So my home, I've been blessed. The 2 homes that I've purchased are very energy efficient. So without the light bulbs and the appliances. So those programs like light bulbs, appliances, and HVAC, all those things, I guess they'll help me out a little bit, I guess. But I don't think that's going to do much for those homes that aren't energy efficient at all. So if we know that problem exists, we know it. We know that any rate increase is going to have 2, 3, maybe 4 times impact on those households. What responsibility, if any, the utilities have to those homes, to those ratepayers?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner, and thank you for giving me some time and allowing a call to a friend. And I think my response will be really talking about it as a health and safety issue. When I used to work for the District of Columbia government, we were faced with some similar issues, and I understand the point you're making about averaging, because that really excludes the much bigger problems that a small portion of the class members have, that the average set of solution isn't really going to satisfy. So what we found in Washington, D.C., for their low-income ratepayers was that there's a very small percentage of low-income ratepayers that were reporting exceedingly high usage. So if typical low-income homes were reporting something like 1,200 kilowatt-hour usage of electricity, these homes were reporting 3,000 kilowatt-hour of usage in the same neighborhood. So it's not about the housing stock and the years that these buildings were built in, because they're more or less in the same neighborhood. What we just based on that data point alone, what we would suspect is that there might be a missing window, like in the basement, and there might be failing ceiling, failing some exposed roof structure. So we tend to consider that to be a health and safety problem. And this is why I was referring to the Commissioner Williams' point about these efforts also really need to be merged together when we are working particularly to solve the energy burden problem for low-income ratepayers, because you will find these problems more often in low-income ratepayer situation. There is a different set of challenge about how to address the bill assistance problem for these folks, because they're almost a special category within the subset of special category within the low-income ratepayer class. But again, there are approaches that other states have made in figuring out how to address the bill assistance needs for this subset of low-income ratepayers that accrue exceedingly high usage and high bills. But I agree with you with the point that for this small subset of customers, low-income customers, the average set of solutions for low-income ratepayers may not be enough.
Commissioner, can I add to that as well?
Oh, sure.
Not bringing the in-depth analytical policy background and expertise that Edward brings, I think I would look at it as more from as what you said earlier, what exists already. There's a lot of data that are out there. Utilities know how much energy folks are consuming. Utilities can find out, comparatively in a neighborhood, is someone disproportionately using more energy than another? And I think you also look at, as Edward said, what utilities use as a measure of success of these programs, and one of which I think you had a couple slides where it looked at kind of the benefits for dollars invested. So I mean, if one is designing an energy efficiency program, I would assume that a measure of success is finding the lowest hanging fruit where you can get the greatest savings for the lowest amount of dollars invested. So if the largest savings you can make on a house is reducing the energy usage by 5% by spending $1,000, or you can spend $1,000 and reduce energy usage by 25%, my assumption is that the utility would be gravitating towards the other, because of what I would assume you all have done in the past, or even industry standards established of looking at cost effectiveness of those programs. So I think when we start looking at the data available of who's using what, the age of the housing stock, which is publicly available, comparative metrics with respect to neighborhoods and geographies. You can even get in granular in terms of looking at income levels. think if we started having a sophisticated analysis, a lot of these things could be easily answered. As you said, the solutions are out there. It's just whether or not we can find them and bring them to bear in South Carolina.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. My last question, at least for this, at least at the moment, references or is in reference to consumer behavior and modifying consumer behavior. What are your thoughts on that as it relates to energy efficiency and conservation? Because it seems to me, through my lived experience as a commissioner, there is a wide range of consumer philosophy on what's comfortable. Comfortable temperature in the home, what's convenient by way of washing clothes or dishes. I've heard hours of testimony about how residential ratepayers live their lives in order to manage their monthly bill. And on the one hand, you have a group of folks that testify to taking cold showers. On the other hand, you have a group of folks who say they have Fort Knox level security cameras and lights, and they keep them on all the time because they believe in being safe and they're comfortable with paying that bill. How do you approach consumer behavior and modifying it to help energy efficiency efforts?
I wish I did have a lifeline to call my behavior colleague who leads our behavior program on that topic. But the one observation that I can make, because this presentation was about the context of low-income ratepayers, I think the behavior change in the context of low-income ratepayers is a little bit different. So when you are able to afford your bill, you are not asked to make trade-offs in terms of taking cold shower and hot shower. You take whatever you need to take. Yet there is this now question when it comes to low-income ratepayers: if they're unable to afford their bill, do I now make this trade-off about in the winter, do I take a cold shower because I don't want to increase my utility bill? So that makes it more complicated in the low-income ratepayer context to discuss behavior change, about what would be equitable to ask of them that we don't ask any other ratepayers to do. And I should probably just stop my comments there, and then before I venture too far into a field that I have less familiarity with.
Well, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. I mean, just because you say it doesn't make it true, but I'm still interested in hearing them. So don't cut yourself off for me. If you have some nuggets you think you can share, I'm interested in hearing them.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I think we should hold low-income ratepayers' behavior, and we shouldn't try to really influence their behavior in a way that would be different for any other ratepayer, any other residential ratepayers. So I think that's really just a constraint that I would put on that behavior modification discussion or behavior change discussion for low-income ratepayers. Let's not ask them to do more behavior change than other residential ratepayer classes are asked to do. So if there is, let's say, people really shouldn't have to make trade-offs between safety by having the lights on. The market rate residential customers, they don't make that trade-off. They are able to afford that bill. And we shouldn't be asking low-income ratepayers to make that trade-off either.
I would add, though, too, I think the interventions, Edward, that you talked about today, I mean, the end result of those is what savings can you get with the same behavior, right? So you go from a regular light bulb to a LED light bulb, you get a savings without having to turn the lights off more, right? If you go from no insulation to insulation, you can keep the thermostat set at the same amount, but you still save more information. Behavioral change is fleeting. It may not be as durable. It may not be as permanent. And I bet there's a lot of research and data about how you can make it more sticky, right? Like how you can make a permanent change of behavior. But I think, life situations change, temperatures change, stress levels change, how old your kids are and how complainy they get about, temperatures and other things. That changes, right? People move in and out of homes. And so I think the interventions that were highlighted today that really go to things that you don't have to think about, right? I don't have to think about how much insulation is in my wall every day once I get it improved. I don't have to think about how efficient is my HVAC system once I upgrade it. I don't think I have to think about, am I at 15% energy loss from sealing my ducts once I get them sealed, right? So my behavior doesn't have to change, but I still reap the benefits of the efficiency. So I do think that's why there's a balance between and a need for both behavioral change and education, but also the things that, kind of the infrastructural changes that can be put in place that don't require you to change your behavior or don't require you to think about what you do on a daily basis and just let you live your life. So I do think they're balanced.
So I want to connect those two together to highlight something, and I don't know if these programs exist or not. But we know that I think it would be accepted that if your home is not well insulated and it's inefficient, to maintain any temperature, whether that's to be cool during the summer or warm during the winter, it's going to take more energy. I think that's a fair assumption. And so let's say the best practice is 68 degrees. It's going to take more energy for me to keep my inefficient home at 68 degrees. So it takes me back to that responsibility. When we talk about energy efficiency, is there not some responsibility, or is it a fair thought that a utility should bear some of the burden for making some homes more efficient by insulation, sealing the ducts, and some of the things that you talked about to improve the efficiency of the home, lowering the peak demand, again, all the things that you discussed?
Yeah. From an equity perspective, I think it's a worthwhile investment for utilities to invest more in those inefficient homes in the ratepayer communities, in the low-income ratepayer communities. I do think that that's a worthwhile investment. I do think it's more of a policy choice to make that a utility obligation, but I do think just in terms of the financial and economic benefits of such investments, for the reasons that you just mentioned, including the impact on demand and peak load, they are worthwhile investments.
Mr. Tynan?
I got it. I would agree that I think that there's a policy decision that's embedded in there, and I don't want to necessarily speak to that, but I think what I think about is in the context of what utilities are currently looking at and measuring. I mean, when you look at, they're already required and obligated to have reliable service at cost-effective rates. And so I think we ask the question, how do we get to and how do utilities achieve those goals? And I think, what Edward highlighted today is that reliability increases across the board. Affordability increases across the board, not just with the individuals served by these interventions, but with all ratepayers in a customer class that can reap the benefits of not having to build, however many gigawatts of additional power plants that were outlined in Texas, for example. So I think the metrics of success are already kind of built into the system. I think the question, I would rephrase your question of saying, who gets served is a question of equity and policy of, are we only serving folks that have median income, median energy usage, and we're getting savings there? Or are the utilities programs specifically going out and intentionally targeting to proportionately serve low income individuals, low wealth individuals? And have we addressed some of the disparities in the system that Edward highlighted at the beginning of, 30% of households are low wealth, low income, but they're only getting 17% of the efficiency programs. I think there's an inherent policy question. I think there's an inherent, how are we designing the programs? Are we reaching out to to individuals with messengers they trust, with organizations that they have connections to? And I think that's both a program design and a policy question that could, that could be the topic of likely other presentations to you all.
And I wouldn't mind that, because what I'm trying to figure out is this is the unknown. Is it more effective to insulate uninsulated houses or purchase thousands of LED light bulbs? Is it more effective if they're 10,000, 5,000, 2,000 horribly inefficient homes? We talk about benefit per dollar. Is it more beneficial to insulate those homes to the best of whatever technology we have, to the best of our ability based on the technology at the time, or offer free LED light bulbs for everyone in the service territory? I don't know that. I mean, I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, that's a similar, in my view, that's a sort of a similar question to the one that Commissioner Williams asked about the granularity, the time interval of various demand response programs. It depends on what the utility and grid operators are trying to achieve. If you just want to lower the overall system demand at their largest footprint of their grid, if they're trying to lower the demand of that, probably the most easiest and the most efficient way to do that is just buy 10,000 light bulbs and just spread them throughout. But if you are trying to achieve other objectives, like lowering the substation level system demand, lowering the need, avoiding or deferring the need for line transformers to be upgraded in a particular neighborhood, then doing a deeper whole home approach where you use both efficient appliances and insulation and weatherization measures, that will be more effective. Because as you mentioned, in a deeply inefficient home, one LED light bulb is not really going to make a difference for that particular home, even though aggregated system-wide, it will make a difference for the utility grid operator. So it really does have to do with what the sort of the solutions that you look at really does depend on the problem that you are trying to solve. And I do notice that there isn't a magical one program that solves all problems. So that's the sort of the complicating nature of that. And Commissioner Williams, I mean, to your question about that idea of insulating homes and versus appliances, I mean, so one way to think about is this also, which is, let's imagine a situation of a system outage. And there are two homes. One is a well-insulated home and another one is poorly insulated home. There is going to be a discrepancy in terms of the health and safety consequences to those two homes based on the level of insulation. But because the well-insulated home will have longer hours of safety without external power source to remain safe inside, because of the temperature range will be habitable. For the poorly insulated home, the hours of safety will be much shorter. Now, is that utility's responsibility to fix that is a policy question in my view, and outside the scope of my presentation, although it is a very hot, important topic, particularly in the context of resilience and extreme weather events.
All right. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone had any other responses or comments to my questions, observations. No? Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one point. John, you may be better, Mr. Kim, either one of you. And I'm kind of taking off on what Commissioner Justin Williams has said. When we hear a case, we always hear the companies wanting to do all these good things, but they want the incentive, they want the compensation, they want the money, which really goes back to the ratepayers anyway. I think about, of course, we're always told, whatever you're dealing with, that people are good corporate citizens. We know ratepayers are trying to help each other. We hear that in these public hearings, that they want to help the neighbors. They're not here because they can't pay their bill. They're here because the neighbor can't pay their bill. As a good corporate citizen, do you think, or as a utility, as a good corporate citizen, do you think they have a duty to do some of the things that Commissioner Williams was talking about without compensation or without a bonus or incentive? They should just do these things because it's the right thing?
Well, Vice Chair Powers, I hate to dodge this question, but I do think that, again, I can completely frame it as a worthwhile economic investment and financial investment for all ratepayers and for the utilities. When it comes to the assignment of obligation and duty, I do think that that's a policy choice that's beyond the scope of my presentation.
Well, and of course, we don't run the utilities. We can't tell them how to run their business. We just set certain things, and we do it under some very strict laws and restrictions. But just, I think about, it's always bothered me, it's not the Southern 500, now it's the Mountain Dew 500. Of course, they just pay for that, and that's advertising. But I just think that good corporate citizens have duties that go beyond making extra money. That's just a thought.
Yes, I think that's an entirely fair point. I mean, we know that these utilities began as regulated monopolies because the premise is that they're stepping in the shoes of the essential government service. So to the extent that, this ensuring certain minimum number of hours of safety in their homes without external power source, I think that's a fair point to bring up. Just not one that I am able to weigh in at this time.
Thank you very much.
Commissioners, other questions?
This is not a deep, comprehensive question, Mr. Yim. You do know that South Carolina is still it's not deregulated.
Oh yes.
You do. Oh, you do. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
my apologies for speaking about the commodity and supply thing earlier.
Well, no, I understood where you're coming from, but I just want to make sure that your presentation equally applicable to regulated versus deregulated states?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Commissioners?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. One of the interesting aspects of energy efficiency for me is that when it's properly implemented by investor-owned utilities, it has the added advantage of reducing load demand, which affects and benefits all ratepayers, because without energy efficient measures, the demand response has to be met with the cost of building new generating facilities. Would you speak to that principle for a moment, please?
My apologies, Commissioner Irvin. Would you mind just rephrasing that question for me just one time? I think I just lost track.
Sure. It's a simple concept. With increased energy efficiency, don't we also see decreased demand on the grid?
Yes. It's not guaranteed, but it will have, it's not, well, yes. So the answer is yes. If you increase your efficiency, thereby decreasing the usage and consumption on a kilowatt hour basis, it will also decrease the kilowatt of demand. Depending on the approach and how you design these efficiency programs, some programs may reduce more demand than other efficiency programs.
That's right. And so we worry a lot about winter peaking and summer peaking because that's when we run into trouble where demand for electricity exceeds the available resources of our investor-owned utilities. We saw that during the Christmas Eve. I don't know if you were aware, but we went, much of the upstate was without power due to rolling blackouts on Christmas Eve because demand, with people being home during the cold spell that we had, demand substantially increased and exceeded supply. And so the only thing that the operators had available to them was rolling blackouts. And if we had a robust energy efficiency program, that in turn would reduce that winter peak and summer peak as well. You agree with that?
Yes, I do. And in the example of Texas, I think this is why Texas, who had lost interest in energy efficiency for a number of years now, is taking another look at energy efficiency to deal with these extreme weather events that they now expect to be sort of a normal occurrence. So the popular measures for them are going to be things like smart water heaters, heat pump water heaters that use requires very little usage. They are able to provide demand response. So in other words, they can heat up their tanks when the constraints are low on the grid, and so they can preheat their water. Obviously, making sure that your homes are better insulated and weatherized, that's another key thing. So a lot of these measures that, especially the examples of these bundled program of measures that I shared with you today, that really, a lot of those are really measured going towards sort of reducing the winter peak load.
Right, and that is important because, as we know, South Carolina is currently not a member of an RTO, so we can't call on other jurisdictions for backup power in the event of excessive load situation. Did you know that?
Yes.
So, even though Duke tried to get additional power supplies from other jurisdictions, they were not available during that Christmas Eve incident. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of it, but I'm not surprised to hear it, again, given the nature of the territories and the systems, how they're set up.
And your comments today, and I appreciate you being with us in the organization today. Your comments have kind of been generalized, but I'd like to talk a minute about the South Carolina Public Service Commission and some changes that were made by the 4-3 majority, I believe it was last year, as it relates to cost effectiveness test. You're familiar with various tests. When we look at the cost effectiveness of energy efficiency, like the participant test, the ratepayer impact test, the utility cost test, the societal cost test, and the total resource cost test. You aware of those?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Did you know that the South Carolina Public Service Commission now requires that an investor-owned utility must meet all the tests in order to qualify? We previously didn't have that rule, but now we do. Were you aware that change had been made recently?
No, I wasn't aware of that change, and thank you for educating me on that. But I am generally familiar with how different jurisdictions employ different set of tests to determine what is cost effective or not.
Right. Are you aware of any other jurisdiction other than South Carolina that requires that all tests be met for an energy efficiency program to be approved?
My understanding is that there's a very small number of states that require that all the tests must be met. I think that is a that tends to be viewed as a stringent requirement. Many jurisdictions do employ all 4 tests, but they really break them out into primary test and secondary test. So many states will often employ what will be the primary test. So in the example of Michigan, their primary test is a utility cost test. But they will still ask their utilities to run other tests for purpose of tracking and informing their program design. But they don't require that all of the tests must be met altogether. Virginia had a similar situation as the current South Carolina situation, where their programs had to meet all 4 tests. But a couple of years ago, I think they changed the law so that they don't. I think they have to meet 3 of the 4 tests.
And it's interesting too that the South Carolina General Assembly has a pending bill that would go back to only 2 of the 4 tests in order to.
Commissioner, can we not talk about documents that are outside the presentation, please?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about energy efficiency, so I think it's relevant.
But
anyway,
you're going to have to
I'll
produce.
wrap it up.
You're going to have to
Appreciate it.
produce the document for the record.
It's a matter of public record. We can get a copy of the bill if we'd like, and I think.
If documents that are not utilized in the presentation are referenced in questions or discussion, then whoever brings it up has to provide a copy for ORS to be able to certify the record.
I'll be happy to make that available to the court reporter after the hearing. The new statutory provision that I just referenced. Thank you. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you still. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
And Ms. Nepley, the K is silent, correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Because the first question I had was actually for you, and I think it was when you were a little away from the microphone. You had mentioned, and I've heard it mentioned similarly in the past, that South Carolina has some of the highest energy bills in the country. Where did you say that information came from?
So I have, let me go back to my notes here. That was from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and I can file that report with ORS after.
So, do you know, did you have in that information, like, what is it? Are we second highest, 10th highest, 25th highest?
Subject to check, I think it's 9th.
And this is current info, like this year, last year, the most current info?
Yes, I have to double check the date on the report, but it's within the 2020s, I believe.
Okay.
Oh.
I just wasn't sure where it came from. Thank you.
And I need to double check on the number. I don't have that info.
Quite all right. If it's not in your presentation, don't worry. I mean, I'll look at that and see what was there. Simple as that. And on slide 5, and I think this was relative to your presentation, Mr. Yim, slide 5, looking at the energy burden, I guess the total energy burden, is that, sometimes it's just too fast. I see numbers too fast and stuff, and it's like, man, I need to process this, and you've already gone to the next one. It's not your fault. It's mine. But looking at those and thinking about it, the percentages, is that looking at electrical? Is that looking at gas? Is that looking at fuel oil? What is that? What does that mean? What's that number from the energy burden?
It was looking at the total energy bill, so both gas and electric combined in the northeastern states, combining fuel oil prices as well.
Okay. so it's not just an electrical, it's not just gas, it's just a whatever it costs you to turn on your lights, run your appliance, heat your house, and cool your house.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this has been asked before, but you've talked about different studies, and I'm not asking to introduce any studies or you to introduce any studies, but has ACEEE performed any studies relative to energy efficiency of all appliances, say, over the last 30, 20, 10 years? It's my understanding that, stuff's more efficient
Yes.
now, especially in the last decade. Is that true or false?
Please be careful about asking for studies that are not in the record.
Don't answer that question. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, anyway. Well, I was going to ask you guys if you did any of those kind of studies, not that I want to know that.
Right. In terms of, yes, we do. We have a separate team that works on just appliance standards. They're called Appliance Standards Awareness Project.
Okay.
And they do a lot of studies on that issue.
Thank you. And on your slide 9, I was looking at it again, trying to take it all in as you were going through it. And you did a wonderful job, by the way. I'm just a slow looker and processor.
Thank you for the kind
but
words.
In the, I think the McKinsey report you referenced, and at least the footnote I saw said like 2008. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's 15 years. Has there been anything?
It is an old study. I wish that they had upgraded their study, but I don't believe they have.
So that's what I was going to ask you as far as you knew. That's all. And on your slide 16, where you're talking about the PIP laws, Gladys Knight came to mind when you said that, actually, but capping utility bills for income participants, and you may have already addressed this, maybe when you were talking to Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, and I just missed it, but where it said it was funded through a universal service fee. I assume similar to telecom or whatever. Is that, where does that come from?
Oh, I think I mentioned that different jurisdictions could employ, in response to Commissioner Williams' question, in terms of paying for these programs, they could use different methods. I believe the ones that I'm familiar with are the ones that are done through surcharge on the ratepayer bill, but there could be other mechanisms such as unbilled financing or unbilled payment to pay for these. And I am aware that, for example, in Maryland, they are considering some type of PIP program or PIP legislation, and in their conversations that I listened to, they were discussing other ways of paying for it, paying for the program, such as creating a taxpayer fund to pay for that program. So I mean, there is a whole range of options for paying for this program. It's not just restricted to using the typical utility program cost recovery mechanisms.
And I may have missed it, and I may have missed it on the slide, but in any of those examples you used, does the utility participate in that any, I mean, out of their portion, or?
I'm not actually familiar to the level of that level of detail, Commissioner Caston, so my apologies on that. Again, I am somewhat new to the PIP program discussions too, and it's something that we are actively researching now.
You have no need to apologize to me. That's quite all right. I understand. And as I was reading through the information you had on the PIP program and such as that, and talking about the bills being capped, I think, legislatively, my first thought, maybe it's been addressed and maybe you addressed it and maybe it's non-issue. But if they're capped, I was wondering if and how is it addressed? What would be the incentive to just not use a whole bunch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the behavior change question, I think, that would have some relationship to the one that Commissioner Williams asked earlier. In other words, once you ensure energy affordability no matter what, is there an incentive to conserve energy? And I think that is a trade-off, and that is a compromise that one might make. But again, because in terms of what we are talking about isn't the case where if a low-income ratepayer were given this affordability, it's not like as if they're just going to go out and buy 6 new video game consoles and large TVs and refrigerators. It's really ensuring the minimum viability in terms as a functionable household in terms of energy equity. So this measures like this is really about ensuring the floor, the minimum viability, not so much about. I personally do worry less about the incentive question, although it is a question that does need to be asked. And I'll just stop there. There are studies that discuss these issues, but I think that will be outside this.
If they're not part of this presentation, we'll cross that bridge later. And I guess finally, as I was thinking about the questions that Commissioner Justin Williams, Carolee Williams, and actually Commissioner Powers asked relative to, I guess, the cost, will bills go down, all those things, kind of put them all in one big pot. And you answered quite definitively, well, yes, and I think twice, yes. And anytime I hear something definitive, I automatically wish I could just ask 1,000 questions, not because I don't believe the answer is yes, but because I want you to prove the answer is yes. But that's not what I'm asking here at all. Because, when I hear studies and things like that referenced, and do not reference any, not in this thing, my first thought, and I guess it's that kind of that old school where you come from, using the scientific method of proving a hypothesis or revising it. That's just the way I am. I don't mean it that it's good or bad. It's just the way I am.
Yeah, of course.
So when I think about those things, I don't know how to wrap all that up to understand it. Like all these different programs, all these potential things we could do, whether it's insulate the house, whether it's energy efficiency appliances, which, okay, are they already energy efficient or are there different levels? I don't know how to wrap all that up and come up with a definitive anything without breaking it into either logical bites or segments or doing really in-depth scientific.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that concern and issue. Yeah. So, one thing I wish that this DOE study did, because this isn't some modeling or projection of programs and measures. They gave out what they did is, through their energy efficiency and conservation block grant, they awarded their grant funds to many different communities in 25 states. So there are all these organizations received these funds, and that they went out and implemented, installed all these measures, efficient appliances, some weatherization, and so forth. And once those measures were installed, they did an evaluation of the actual energy savings from pre-installation baseline. So they definitely, and then they evaluated and measured and verified those energy savings from the baseline. So that's what the 2013 DOE study did. What they didn't do is then take the next step, and I think this is a more difficult task. What they didn't do is then do the bill impact study of those measures. But that requires reaching out to 100,000 households, asking for their bills, all their past bills of 12 months or 2 years worth of bills, and then compiling that. And I think they didn't have the money or the resources to do that. But had they done that, then that really would have been interesting to see what the actual savings were in terms of their bill savings. We know that there are energy savings, to be sure. But the question that I think that still lingers in some of the policymakers and regulators' minds do these energy savings actually result in bill savings? And the answer is yes. Again, a lot of different pockets of evidence. I'm not aware of one major study that just incontrovertibly lays that out at the nationwide or region-wide and so forth. I'm not particularly aware of that. Because of when you have to reach into that level of ratepayer bill, there's a lot of, that's information transfer that, not only is that just difficult to get that kind of information, it calls into privacy concerns and all of that. So doing that level of analysis is actually difficult. I don't think it's easy. Which is why people then tend to rely on sort of statistical analysis, projections and regression analysis, but those do not tend to satisfy some of these lines of specific questions.
Well, Mr. Yim, one thing I've learned, that if things were easy, everybody would do them. And I guess wrapping up along the lines of what Commissioner Powers said, Justin Williams, Commissioner Williams. One thing I do know is that whether it's the high income, middle income, low income, their customer, they pretty much pay for everything. Now, the lower income, it hurts more than it does the higher income. But one thing I'm absolutely certain of is they pretty much pay for it, good or bad, whether we figured it right or not, whether the utility did it right or not. So all these things are very important. I think we need to study them and know to the best of our ability in fine detail the truth and the facts. And I applaud and I appreciate presentation you guys have brought to us, and I'm eager to learn more. But I'm not going to ask you anything right now on that. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. I have two quick questions that I think will result in two quick clarifying answers. Ms. Neffley, in talking about South Carolina having some of the highest bills in the country, do you know if that was related to the usage or the rates?
Yes, so I'll follow up on Commissioner Caston's questions first. I look back at the report. It was from 2021 in August, and South Carolina was the fourth highest. And that report referred to bills and not rates.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kim, on page 5, the U.S. image that you have of energy burden and the graph, the information on it talks about median low income energy burden by region and median energy burden by region. Is that median based on all residential users, or is it median of low income?
So the median low income energy burden figure will be a subset, will be a different group. So the median energy burden would just be non-low income households their median number.
The purple is the
Yes.
3.2%.
Yes.
And then those that just, that take out other folks and just focus on low income is the orange, the
Yes.
8.4, or possibly 6% in a particular utility area that Ms. Knepfle mentioned, I think. Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Walsh, anything further?
Madam Chair, nothing more to add.
Well, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Tynan, Ms. Knepfle, Mr. Yim, thank you very much for being here and sharing the information you did today. And let me check with ORS. Mr. Torrey?
Madam Chair, there were some documents referenced that I'll get with Mr. Walsh and see if we can get those in the record.
Thank you. If y'all will work that out following this. Thank you again. And with that, we will close this allowable ex parte communication briefing, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.